Larken, just so you know who's here, Matt is our host. Jared is co-host slash engineer. Kyle is the token statist.
Yes.
But he's a nice guy for a statist. So,
All right, we're live, guys.
Okay. Hello, I'm Matt Bergman, and you are listening to the Punk Rock Libertarians podcast, episode 294. I'm here tonight with Jared Schneiderman.
Hey, guys.
Kyle Wagner.
Hey, what's up?
James Babb.
Hello. And we have a guest with us, Larken Rose, personal friend and my personal arborist, anarchist, and tax heretic, author of The Most Dangerous Superstition, The Iron Web, How to Be a Successful Tiger, Kicking the Dragon, Parasites on Parade. I may be missing some. There's also a bunch of cool videos you may recognize, like The Tiny Dot. I'm allowed to rob you.
Yeah, I'm allowed to rob you. That's like the classic Larken Rose video, right?
When should you shoot a cop?
Oh, yeah.
The Jones Plantation and so many other nuggets. Welcome, Larken Rose.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hell yeah, man. Dude, thanks for coming on the podcast. So Larken, like I just heard earlier, maybe I heard this before, maybe not. I don't know. I smoke a lot of weed, but so you actually went to jail for like not paying your taxes? Like what happened?
Well, technically it wasn't even tax evasion. It wasn't even that fun. It was misdemeanor willful failure to file. It was not sending in pieces of paper to the IRS. So it wasn't even like hiding stuff or getting sneaky or anything.
So you're a heretic.
I'm a tax heretic. The short answer is even pretty dang long. At this point, I give away for free an ebook of my book, Kicking the Dragon, Confessions of a Tax Heretic, which tell the whole ridiculous story. It actually wasn't anything about like philosophy or a protest or any of that. It was about the fact that they lie about their own laws. Taxes are inherently bogus and immoral no matter what. So to one extent, I don't really care what their scribbles say. I just had a little bit of hope that the people who believe in the legalese scribbles would care if they were being lied to. Apparently most of them just don't. But yeah, they stuck me in federal prison. It was minimum security, so it was boring, stupid waste of time, but not scary prison. And mostly what I did is write books they don't like. So
like how long
were you in there for?
15 months, which came out to just over a year.
Wow.
Because I didn't shank anybody.
Was it pretty much shank or be shanked? I mean,
well, in minimum security, there's no fights. Because if anybody does anything there, they send them off to somewhere that's a whole lot worse.
Right.
So it's known as a satellite camp, where it's basically a bunch of people who everybody knows don't belong in prison. And
so you were in a country club?
Well,
white collar,
like a government resort.
White collar resort prison.
How many stars do you give them for TripAdvisor?
Is there can I go negative? Can I go over 0? No,
Would you recommend them to others? Yeah.
Depends what your other options are. So it was a stupid, ridiculous waste of time, but it wasn't scary or something or anything. And I wrote The Iron Web in there, my novel, and I wrote the whole book about my adventures with the IRS called Kicking the Dragon, which I now give away for free, and wrote some music and did some other stuff, fun stuff. But mostly it was a giant, stupid waste of time.
Okay, so like how long ago did this happen?
This was, the trial was 2005, and they basically stole 2006 from me. I was in a cage for all of 2006.
So like after you've had this happen, and it could go way worse, when you think about like Irwin Schiff fucking died in prison.
Yeah.
So like, what would you tell like tax protesters now? Like if somebody's thinking about like,
I would tell them exactly what I told them when I was doing it, which is, hey, everybody watching, do not do this. I ran full page ads asking the federal government to prosecute me. I wasn't trying to get away with something. And I wasn't at all expecting them to be fair and rational I wanted to be their guinea pig if they were going to go after somebody for this particular issue. So I volunteered to be, and I told everybody, of course, in fact, I predicted so many details about what they ended up doing ahead of time and said, they're going to cheat on this. They're going to lie about this. They're going to do this because they have to do this demonization thing to get a conviction. For not to get too much into the legal stuff, but every federal tax crime has an element of willfulness, which means if the person didn't believe they were breaking the law, if they weren't trying to break the law, you can still steal their stuff, but you're not supposed to prosecute them. So every crime is willful. So if somebody has some theory that's totally wrong, but they believed it, you're legally, they care about that, you're allowed to swipe their stuff, but you're not supposed to prosecute them. So they had to try to prove that I didn't believe what I was saying. And they just skipped that. It's well, we can't nearly do that. So we're just going to call them names and demonize them.
And also block you from presenting things like your white paper on the subject, your letters to Congress, your letters to the H&R Block saying, hey, this is what I believe. Is this correct? Fill me in on that. Everything that I just remember from that trial is that everything that you could have done to show what you believed, you were blocked on.
Absolutely. It was a just kangaroo court, ridiculous routine.
I mean, I was astonished. I had never been to a federal trial before, and what a wake-up call that was.
Yeah.
Wow.
And the funny thing is, even though it had nothing to do with philosophy, there's a bunch of people now who say they became anarchists in part starting there, even though it was just about a legal thing, because they saw how much the beast doesn't care about its own rules. When it comes right down to it, when their power is threatened, all of that show that they put on about due process and the rule of law, yada, it's fancy words to make people think that there's something other than just mafia thugs. And no, they're not. And I said before it happened, I'm going to make them show themselves for whether I win or lose. I'm going to make them show themselves for what they are. And I did. Would have been more fun to do that and get acquitted. But they cheated so bad on so many. And yeah, they literally, both sides agreed that the entire trial was about what I believed. Now, I'm not allowed to tell the jury what the law is, but I'm allowed to explain what I believed. And so they said, okay, your job is to explain what you believed, but I'm not making this up. You're not allowed to bring in any statement you've ever made before you stepped into this courtroom.
Because that's hearsay or whatever.
That's hearsay, which is not what hearsay means. But
No.
yeah, they ruled out all of that, including recordings of talking to the IRS.
They even you even had a video. There was a video you had on the subject.
Yeah.
And they're like, well, we'll let you show some of the video as long as the sound's not on.
Right.
What the hell? What?
Really? What about closed captions?
It was literally, and just imagine this in your own case. If there's some case where you have to prove your state of mind, but you have to do that without referring to anything you've ever said on the subject. What?
Yeah.
That's really the rules. And that's literally what they did.
But then meanwhile, they had access to how many years of your emails that they had manually gone through and could pick and choose anything that you had said at any time to anybody in your whole life and present it to the jury.
They said they had over 10,000 emails from me, and they found zero indicating that I didn't believe what I was saying.
But they would pull out things. I remember at one point that prosecutor, he goes, he's an anarchist.
Yeah.
I mean,
and he did
impression
that
on him.
There's a thing called a motion in limine where before it goes to trial, people argue about, well, what is or isn't allowed at the trial? What's relevant? What's, so you argue over evidence before you're anywhere near a jury. And one of the things that was decided ahead of time is political beliefs have nothing to do with this. You can't bring up he's an anarchist. You can't talk about any of that stuff. And then, in the middle of the trial, he's an anarchist. And I said,
really?
am I allowed to explain what that means? No.
Wow.
Well, so since if he brought it up, then that meant that you could talk about it, right?
Well, in theory, but they said no.
Yeah, of course.
I literally asked, am I allowed to explain what that means? And they said no. It's okay, super fair.
What a joke. What a freaking joke.
So that and I hand wrote, printed out, the book is 488 pages long, Kicking the Dragon. I give it away for free as an ebook now. It's out of print because it's a huge thing. It's expensive to print. I hand wrote most of that. So it was 2,000 and some pages handwritten in prison to tell the whole ridiculous story. I can't read it more than a little chunk at a time without wanting to strangle somebody. The number of ways they cheated and lied and the number of evil crap they did, just freaking amazing.
It was
so
clearly
got
on
it down in
display.
writing.
And they didn't seem to even blush about it or be shy about it in any way. Like, or it's just, they're so used to not even having to pretend in that arena.
Yeah. Well, I had, I did an appeal by way of a very well-known appellate attorney, and he just openly said, yeah, they brought in a prosecutor who is very bad at law and very bad at prosecutions, but his specialty is demonizing people. And that's all they had. So that's why they brought him in.
Hey, how did you rise to the top of your career? Well, I'm good at demonizing people. Ooh, no, come on.
Because I was expressing astonishment at how many like little procedural things he got wrong. It's like, has this guy ever done this before? Because
But when the judge is on your team, he'll help you with all that. Don't worry.
And then it just doesn't matter. Because a bunch of his motions were just these incoherent rants that literally had nothing to do with the legal issue. Because, there's 8 million dumb little motions about 8 million dumb little legal issues. And half of them were like, does he even know what he's supposed to be arguing in this case? Because he's just kind of having a tantrum.
God, did you feel insulted by the level of intellect that they put against you?
Yeah, I was like, couldn't you? Like, I expected somebody at least like clever and creative and something other than
at least mildly diabolical. I mean, like,
and he's
something.
He's just a stupid asshole. that's all you got for me.
So most people file tax returns to get money back, because they have their money withheld and they have W-2 income. So I guess that probably wasn't your situation.
We were self-employed, so we had to rob ourselves throughout the year. And the thing is, when I was going to stop filing, I told them ahead of time and said, I want to meet with you. And I recorded all the meetings and said, here's why I'm not filing anymore. Here's why. And at every one of these meetings, and I had these recordings, which I wasn't allowed to play for the jury. At every one of the meetings, the IRS was like, we've never seen that before. We don't really know. We understand why your position is that. We've never seen these before, and we're not sure how to answer our own position. We'll get back to you. Literally, that's all they ever argued. And then they got back to me a few years later by sending a dozen armed thugs to raid my house.
Did you receive a lot of letters and warnings leading up to this?
Well, the funny thing is they very quickly gave up on the civil side. They never tried to collect. They never tried to collect money. I mean, like, they did the first letters that said, we think you owe money. And I say, I think I don't. And I want an examination meeting. And here are the rules saying you have to give me one and you have to let me record it. So that all happened. They killed the collections. And with the ball in their court, I'm like, I'm waiting for you to tell me your position. You admitted on tape that you didn't know your own position and you'd get back to me. So I'm sitting around thinking, okay, going to wait a while. And if it's forever, that's fine with me. And then they, like I said, they got back to me May 6, 2003 by sending a dozen armed thugs to invade my house and steal all my stuff, steal all the copies of Theft by Deception, the video I made about it. Just outright thuggery when I hadn't hidden anything. And they admitted that. I never hid anything I did. I told them before I even stopped filing, before the due date was even there. And they admitted that, but they had to do this thug routine. And
Did they knock?
Yeah. The funny thing is, at first we thought they were kidding. It was bam, 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 federal agents, and we thought it was like friends of ours joking with us.
Yeah. No, friends don't do that. No, that's a good way for friends to get shot. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, at least they knocked and identified themselves. That's been a big issue lately.
Yeah. So it wasn't a no knock. There was a tense moment at the front door because I wasn't letting them in. I was saying, show me a warrant.
Right.
And it took a while for them to get in. They never gave me the warrant then. It took me 1.5 years to get the warrant unsealed because it was a secret warrant. And so that was another legal battle. And they were like, he's going to publicize it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to publicize it. It's a public document. It's the document that has to show what a bad person I am. Why am I the one trying to publicize it? And you guys,
why are they the ones trying to hide it?
Yeah. And sure enough, when it came out, it was literally a list of them complaining about me saying what I think. There was literally no accusation of any criminal evidence in my house.
But they had confirmation of bad ideas were present in the house.
Yeah, it was literally a list of things that I've said that are perfectly legal for me to say, and they didn't like it. Like a search warrant says, we think this weapon is going to be found at this place, and they literally didn't even allege the existence of
it. Was just scribbled in a crayon. He's an anarchist with a crayon. Yeah.
They want to rummage through his stuff. So they rummaged through my stuff for years and years and years. And what it ended up as is misdemeanor charges. That's all they even tried, is misdemeanor willful failure to file.
Well, you were very public about that.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I'm sure they felt taunted by how public you were and how successful you had been at that time of communicating all of this stuff.
Yeah. I didn't even realize you could serve prison time for a misdemeanor of that length.
I know 2 people who have, me and Wesley Snipes.
You're not even a felon, are you?
You're in good company.
You're not even a felon.
I'm not even a felon. I'm a misdemeanant.
Well, you're still young.
Which nobody's ever heard of because nobody goes to prison for misdemeanors.
Right. That's wild.
You're a Mr. Meon? What is it?
Misdemeanant.
Misdemeanant.
Sounds so feeble. I'd rather be a felon. It sounds better.
Yeah, right. Get some street cred.
We should get like badges that go with whatever our criminal status might be. Like, Mr. Meanant.
Did they ever collect any money from you?
Yeah, they did a clever illegal trick where the court basically said, you're going to give the IRS all the money that they're saying you owe, or we're going to stick you in for 5 years instead of 1, which is just extortion. It's debtor's prison, but it's a fun little trick they do. You're going to admit that you were wrong and say that you owe it, or we'll stick you in for more years. Like, okay.
I didn't know that was an option. It's nice that you were able to, I think I'd rather pay money. I mean, I guess it depends on how much money, but 4 more years of my life, I'd be like, oh my God, I would rather pay.
Yeah. So I paid the extortion and then there's a fine of 10,000. And so we've been bankrupted ever since. So that kind of sucked.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. There's a cheery way to start a show.
You're a good sport.
Nah, but it's important to note though, because like a lot of people do not know that about you, man.
Yeah. And ultimately, it isn't really what matters. Like I said, I was hoping that people would care if they were being defrauded, even if they believe in law and government and authority and all that. And most people don't. But the thing that really matters is the belief in authority. So that's what I focus on now, to the point that, a lot of people know me and have no idea that even happened.
Well, let's talk about the most dangerous superstition, because to me, that's Larken Rose's masterpiece. Maybe you could describe what that book is about and why you wrote that.
I will do the spoiler that it does on like the first page anyway. It's you don't have to like go through the whole thing. The most dangerous superstition is a reference to the belief in authority. The idea that somebody or some group of people can have the moral right to dominate and rule everybody else. And that notion is the foundation of government, of the belief in government. Now, once upon a time, it used to be like churches claimed to be the authority, and then there was the church and the king, and there was sort of this, but today it almost always manifests as civil government. So that's mainly my focus, but it's really any notion, like it used to be divine right of kings. Oh, well, some watery tart lobbed a scimitar at you, and now you have the moral right to rule everybody. And now it's, well, there's a constitution and people elected, and ta-da, now you have superhuman rights. The excuse for it doesn't matter. The notion that anything can warp morality in such a way that there can be rightful masters and rightful slaves is just insane. And that belief in most people's heads is the reason for the vast majority of injustice and suffering in the world. It isn't individual people being nasty on their own. It's people doing the bidding of an imaginary authority because they think it's legitimate, and they think, well, it's called law, we have to obey, and they have to enforce it, and yada, yada, yada. So it's the ugly sight of good people helping their own subjugation and the subjugation of their fellow man, not because of malice, but because of indoctrination. And so pretty much everything I do these days is trying to unindoctrinate people out of that superstition.
How come it's so successful, the indoctrination? Why is that so pervasive? Because it does seem completely insane, but yet if you explain to somebody that maybe they're wrong, they look at you like you've got 3 heads.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the thing is, they've had a lot of time to work on it. And the entire Western education system is based on the Prussian system, which the people who made it just openly said, this is how we are going to program the population to do whatever their rulers tell them, especially when it comes to going somewhere else and killing complete strangers, military stuff. But it is designed to have the student have no will of their own. They can only will what their teachers want them to will. That is what the designers of the Prussian system said was the purpose. And even if you look it up on Wikipedia, you'll see the basis of all Western education is the Prussian indoctrination system. So it's like all of us in our most of us in our most formative years are put through a system that was literally designed to make us mental slaves, and it works.
Do you think I kind of look at some people as being domesticated, like domesticated versions of humans that have been raised in captivity, raised in a barn, raised to love the farmer who feeds them. I know that's kind of a sad way to look
Talk
at
about
fellow
Kyle
human
like
beings,
that.
but I mean, like I feel like sometimes like I'm the buffalo out in the field and the cows are laughing at me. They're like, he doesn't even have a barn to sleep in. Like he doesn't even get veterinary care, like he's out there on the prairie, that poor pathetic bastard. I don't know.
And I often use the term human livestock because that's exactly how the sociopaths look at us. Like we're a thing to generate wealth and power for them. They don't, like, the politicians don't care about us, and the people behind the scenes, they don't care about us. They literally look at us as another species to be exploited and controlled. But they know we're smart enough that they have to put on a show to pretend it's something else. Like a cow, you just put a fence around it and it goes up to the fence and goes, don't know what to do about that. Person would climb over, so you have to convince him outside the fence is scary death and mayhem. Inside the fence, we will take care of you and blah, blah, blah. So it's about mind control rather than just physical control. Like they never have the resources to do brute force control of all of us. They can do it now and then to a few of us when we get uppity and drive a tank through your living room, but they can't do it to 300 million people, which is why they start so young and they start with the mind control. So we feel obligated to be treated like cattle.
Yeah, Mal said that political power flows from the barrel of a gun, and I thought about that quote a lot. But I agree with you that it's actually from what people believe. It's a belief in authority and support for authority and I'll call it public support is actually the foundation of authority, not just violence. Now, violence helps, right? That definitely you can suppress dissenters. But the real foundation of government and of the state is popular support.
Absolutely.
I agree.
And I guess where we disagree is like, I at a certain point, like how can you continue to say it's indoctrination if people just choose that? They just choose to have leaders and to have laws and to have authorities. I mean, it's a choice. It's a conscious choice, and we can't assume that everybody's just indoctrinated. I mean, I've heard your position, and I've heard the statist position, and I think that the statist position is correct. So it's a choice that I make objectively. It's at some point you have to say like, oh, this guy's not just indoctrinated. He just thinks that's what he thinks.
This may sound a little bit insulting. It's not at all a free choice that you made. Nobody in the world would on their own. Leaders is one thing. If somebody goes, I don't really know what I'm doing, and that person seems to, I'll follow their plan. They seem to have an agenda, blah, blah, blah. That's a natural thing in lots of species. There can be voluntary hierarchies that are perfectly moral and useful. Nobody, and I mean nobody on their own thinks, you know what? I need somebody who will violently dominate me against my will and take my money and spend it for things that I wouldn't have spent it on for myself. The only people who ever think that that is necessary or legitimate are people who were trained to believe that that is a legitimate arrangement, and it's not. And so you can say people choose it, but it's sort of like training a dog for all its life to like stay in the cage when you open the door. And then you open the door and said, well, it chose to stay in the cage. Well, kind of, but not really. It didn't choose out of free will in a state of freedom where it actually had any options. It was indoctrinated to the point where it didn't have the mental power to even see the choice. And so on the one hand, yep, people sort of choose it and they cheer for it and they advocate it, but it did not come from them ever. It is residual indoctrination that makes them think that that's necessary or important.
Yeah,
it isn't because they actually freely chose it.
It's not myself really that, you know, I want, you know, I am a libertarian of a sort. I don't like paying high taxes for all of these wars and for
Kyle,
a
you're
lot of the
a great and
waste.
stunning minarchist.
But what, you know, what the domination that people want is often on other people, right? They don't want other people to be free to do certain things. And some of those things I think objectively really shouldn't be allowed. You know, there's a lot of violent crimes that I think need to be violently suppressed.
Yep.
I mean, that's just
And none of that ever justifies government. If
how so?
Because if I feel justified, if there's some like psycho running around my neighborhood killing people, I would feel morally justified going out with a gun and shooting him to stop it as a moral act of defensive force. Now, if I'm a little old lady and like, well, I can't do it, I have the right to do it. I don't have the ability. It's perfectly rational and justified for me to say, well, maybe I can like give my son-in-law some money to go shoot the guy or something. Like, if it's okay for me to do it, it makes sense for me to ask somebody else to do it. Government is never, ever, ever that. Government, by its nature, is never limited to the things that would be justified if you or I did them. It is always inherently an entity that claims the right to do things that we can't, even if it also may use defensive force or like have a crossing guard or something, or have a fire company that puts out fires. Even if it does a few things that aren't aggression, every government by its nature has to be an aggressor. It has to claim the right to do things that we don't have the right to do, because if it didn't, nothing about it deserves the word government.
Yeah, it's in a special position or a privileged position for sure. I mean, you can't do the same things that a cop can do. I mean, legally, physically, you could attempt them, but they're in that role where they have those responsibilities and those powers granted to them. Yeah, I mean, but I would argue that you and everyone, all anarchists, are in the same position as the little old lady who's not capable of doing it herself, because it's only a matter of how much resistance you're facing, right? I mean, you use the example of one psycho, but if it's 800 people that are opposing you, or 10,000 people that are opposing you, you're in the same position of helplessness, right?
And usually it's 10,000 people with badges.
Well, that's sort of that's called a two croquet, or I can't pronounce it correctly.
A costume?
No, I mean the thing of it is, when you have a lot of people, a large society, I mean you have these different groups. I mean we're seeing groups now like Antifa and the Democratic Party and unions, and people form these kinds of groups, and they all have their own interests. So there's a potential for a lot of conflict.
About 99% of that conflict is a direct result of them all believing in political authority. Because Antifa, you know, even though they get called anarchists, they're like, we need more government handouts for the poor. We want the violence of government used for this. Whereas conservatives say, well, we only want the violence of government to make people pay for the military and police. And then the left are like, well, we want the violence of government used for this. The number of people who use violence on their own is very small. There are some people, and they need to be forcibly stopped. The number of people who advocate immoral violence is about 99% of the population, because it's every single person who thinks that government is legitimate. Every one of them, every single one advocates immoral aggression, and they don't recognize it as immoral because the superstition still has its tentacles in their brains.
Yeah, that goes to the subjective nature of morality. I mean, things that you think are immoral, a conservative doesn't think are immoral, and things
But
that
that doesn't
and
even matter. That
like
doesn't even matter.
it does matter. I mean, it matters what people believe. Their belief shapes, what the culture judges as moral and immoral. There's
the
no
reason it doesn't matter in this case is that every single person who believes in government advocates things by way of politics that they know would be immoral if they did it themselves. The problem is not that their underlying moral code says, it's okay to rob my neighbor and beat them up. Most voters don't think that. They do think that if you do it by way of elections and constitutions and hocus pocus and pseudo religious rituals and call it government and call it law.
It's like spraying it with Febreze. Like, like that was a really nasty turd, but let's spray some Febreze on that. And then,
nice winter pine.
And now you will welcome it into your home.
Yeah, they're certainly okay with tax collection for their causes. And a good example would be like public schools. That public schools probably has 90% or higher support within the community. I mean, but the way you phrase it is rob your neighbor, take their money and use it to pay for your kid's school. They wouldn't go for that, but they certainly like public schools.
Yeah, but that's because it's abstracted away. They don't see that happening in the background. They just see.
It's amazing that they don't learn that government schools are corrupt in government schools. Right? Like they don't learn how government schools rip people off
in government school.
Yeah, it's like for some reason in Catholic school they probably don't go into like child abuse very much. Like I'm just guessing. I mean,
yeah, probably. But I mean, it's a perfect example because of all those people who vote for me to be forcibly robbed, and anybody who owns property, actually now I don't own property, so yay. But who votes for their neighbors to be robbed to pay for schooling would never do it on their own. They would recognize that as immoral and psychotic and a bunch of other things. But because they believe in the lie of authority, they vote for it to happen. And then they look at, like, an example of, we just went through the story of what I went through with the federal extortion racket. And I've had statists that I know say, oh, I'm so sorry that happened to you. I don't usually say this because it's so mean, but it's so tempting. Why are you sorry? It's exactly what you voted for. Whether you're Democrat or Republican, you vote for people who you know they will demand my money under threat of force if I don't pay. Why are you sorry that what you wanted to have happen happened? Because every single statist advocates exactly that. Why are you expressing sympathy to me when you're the one who asked that to happen to anybody who doesn't pay tribute to the ruling class? And they have such a disconnect that they don't even recognize it. And I've only done that a few times because it's pretty dang mean. I mean, they all deserve it.
I don't have sympathy for you, Larken, if it's any consolation. I think you knew exactly what you were getting yourself into with it.
Wow.
And Kyle's army needs those taxes, Larken. Pay your fair share.
Well, wait,
Social contract.
just to be clear,
Kyle's global minarchy doesn't run itself.
He's an anarchist.
Just to be clear, I want to be clear about how mean I should be here. Just to be clear, I have a question for Kyle. Do you mean, for example, if some woman walks down a dark alley in a scary part of town late at night, you can say, well, you should have known you would be attacked and mugged and assaulted and whatever else.
Yeah, I mean, Kyle's kind of victim blaming. I agree.
There's a difference between you kind of should have expected that, which I would agree with. By
Kyle, are you criticizing the way Larken dress, and that's what got him attacked?
I was asking for it. But no, wait, I really want to ask.
You hadn't worn those high heels, Larken.
Well, I don't think they're comparable situations, right? Because the mugger is outside the law and the IRS is inside the law, right? You're breaking this country's laws, whereas the mugger is also breaking this country's laws, right?
Okay, so for example, the slave that ran away and gets whipped to death when he gets caught, you have no sympathy for him because he violated the law, right?
Law is the law.
Slave that ran away.
Holy shit!
Yeah.
You had to pause to think about that.
Well, I'm considering your question, Larkin. Just
You
give me a
just
break here.
demonstrated how thoroughly indoctrinated
You're considering
you are.
slavery,
You
dude.
had to pause whether to condemn somebody for being a slave who ran away and got whipped to death. You had to
Again,
pause
all
to
right, I
think
got
about
it.
what you
Again,
No, he's
it's,
thinking
it's,
about-
it's
give-
apples and oranges once again, right?
No, it's not.
No,
because
it's
because these-
slavery or abolition.
Well, we can. I mean, for sure, what the runaway slave is breaking the laws of that time period, right? And
So-
from that
Hold on, let him
perspective, he is a lawbreaker. But I think morally, we would say slavery was wrong, and we're supportive of efforts to resist it. But morally, I think today we don't think that taxes are immoral. I mean, libertarians do, but not everybody does. A lot of people don't, and I don't. So I would think that
Yeah,
again,
and if you lived
you
back
are-
then, you would have cheered for the people whipping the slave to death.
you
because
are not, as a
worship law
tax
above
evader,
morality.
Larkin, as a tax evader, you are not equivalent to a runaway slave. You might think that you are, but you're not.
Why
Right.
not? What's the difference?
You have an obligation to pay taxes because you live in this country and you
Yeah,
use
I know.
public services.
You believe that because you believe that politician scribbles alter morality.
No. I just believe
what-
it because I think that people that live here and that drive on our roads and that live in this country have an obligation to pay. They owe that money.
Well, what if you live on the
What you mean
plantation?
our roads?
Do you owe that? Do you
Dude, have
owe
you seen
that
the roads
cotton?
around?
If you're allowed to live on the
Here?
plantation, do you owe that cotton to the master? No.
I mean, that's how serfdom worked essentially.
Well, what's the difference? You're
What's-
saying that whatever the rule makers declare to be law, I have to abide by, and if I don't, I deserve
it's
the
their
violence
kingdom.
of law being imposed on me.
It's their kingdom, and if you don't want to get killed, you will obey the king.
Yeah,
Is that it,
it's their
Kyle?
kingdom, but
Am
it's just comes with the society that you live in. It comes with the country that you live
Well,
in. It's
so
not
did
just it's more than just their kingdom. It's more than just the politicians. It's like a giant neighborhood. You live in this neighborhood, you follow the rules of this neighborhood.
Ew. What kind of fucked up neighborhood has the rules that those guys get to rob the rest of us? This is not.
It's the
something
United
the
States,
neighborhood
but
decided.
you live in the United States. It's a country.
Doesn't
I
make
mean,
it
it
right.
was here before you were,
It's
right?
it's a
Why does the
made-up-
country have to bend to Larken Rose's way?
Oh God!
How about if it
There's
just
no
leaves
even
Larkin
that
alone?
big of a statist.
Maybe
wait.
just-
Wait, I can fix this. Ready? The planet is now mine. I am the rightful ruler of the planet. Kyle, give me half of your stuff, or you're a criminal and you should be caged.
It
Lost
doesn't
law.
work that way. It
Why
does,
not?
it's not a self-declaration. It comes from there's
Oh,
a
you
col-
wrote the
there's a
Well, hold on, hold on.
You gave them
Kyle.
that power.
I have a question
get-
for Kyle. Kyle, how did the U.S. government come to own the property that is the United States of America and its borders? How did it come to rightfully possess that?
I mean, it was unowned, and then it's a large organization of people that sort of just claimed ownership.
Nope.
But it was originally unowned.
I mean, who claimed the ownership? Though?
What? I mean, wasn't it kind of owned by like Native Americans and they kind of like stole it? They
yeah.
kind of stole it.
Well, some people make that case, but I think there were only
So
like
what? Some people made that case.
I think there
I
were
mean, the
only
Native
like 3
Americans were here
million
first,
Native
right?
Americans. I mean,
But I mean,
a
what
large,
grants-
large
what grants-
swaths of the land were completely unoccupied and unused.
So one. Oh, okay. Well, there were already people here, so I just claimed the planet. The fact that there weren't people here doesn't matter. Oh, here. If you want, I'll write it down. Larken shall have power to lay and collect taxes on Kyle. There, I did exactly what the founders did. They made up a power and wrote it down on a piece of paper.
Didn't you make a video about this, Larkin?
I did indeed.
You lack the political clout, I guess, that the government has.
I lack the indoctrination in your brain, and that's the only difference. One
Well,
set of
it's an
lines
organization of
convince
people.
you
I
that
mean-
they have the right to rule, and I haven't yet. That's the only difference. There is no more.
You're an individual, Larkin. In order to govern, you need a lot of support. And we talked about the foundation of government being public support and public opinion, and you don't
Hey,
have
Jim.
that.
Hey, Jim, can we vote for
Yeah.
me to be emperor?
I don't know. Man,
Just
I'll
over
tell you
Kyle.
what. I'll tell you what. I'll count all the votes, and I'll let you guys know who the
Okay.
emperor is. Okay.
But Kyle, I think we're getting into a circular argument here, because basically you're saying public support is what grants government the right to do what it does. And what Larkin's argument is that, okay, but that support is through these indoctrination camps, aka public schools.
I mean, they didn't
So
even
it's like,
exist back then.
it's not like people were just freely, walking around thinking, and we're like, well, hey, let's create this thing. Like it was a manufactured consent, I guess.
Well, isn't there a way everybody could get what they want if we say, look, you guys that want to be bound to your thing, right? You guys say, cool, you go off and do that. And those of us that don't want to participate, we're just going to pass. Okay. And you leave us alone. Right.
I wish
So
it
you
was
can
that
have
simple.
you can do whatever little rituals or games or special songs or, flags or, whatever floats your boat. Just
Definitely
allow
flags.
us to opt out. Would that be reasonable?
It's not that simple, because you're living on land that is part of the country. If
that
you were to
doesn't
go to
mean-
some unclaimed land and claim that as your own country and start fresh,
You're
maybe
living on a planet that's part of my territory. It doesn't mean
it's
anything.
not
if
it's not your
politicians say,
territory. I mean, it's actually all claimed by nation states at this
Yeah,
point.
I just
think just
overruled them.
about
Now it's mine. Just
I
like
think I think just about every square inch is claimed by nation states,
yeah,
right?
I just overruled them. Now it's
Right.
mine, just like they did to the Indians.
Yeah, but
And
you lack the authority and the ability to do that.
That's only in your imagination. That is the only difference.
I mean, I
That
think
is
it's
the only difference.
no,
is
I think it's
imagine
the
one
reality.
group of
The
people-
reality, Larkin, is
No,
you
it
lack
isn't.
the military force to take it, so you lack the ability to do it,
You just
and then
you
you
yourself
don't
just
have any
described the
support.
difference.
There's no public support behind you.
I know. There
But
is
if he
public.
had-
You
but
don't
let's
seem to
just
know,
say-
because you're
Well,
claiming
how about this
something.
though? What about Chaz? Okay. All right. Where we do have basically some people just said, fuck you. We've got our own, we're no longer part of your thing. You're going to leave us alone. And who knows how it'll go. It's happened before where people can just in one particular place say, you know what, fuck that. And I guess that would be horrifying to you, Kyle, right? Or like people actually breaking away and splitting into factions, or what if we just
Yeah,
put everybody in
faction
one
wars.
big country and just have one person rule it all? Wouldn't that be the best way, to just have one guy own everything and then we'll all just obey one guy?
Just let
Well,
me do it. I'll be nice.
Well, I think with borders that you can have different countries, right? As long as there's borders and everybody stays on their side of the line, there's no conflict, right?
What
So
about West
you don't
Virginia
need
and
a
regular
one world
Virginia?
government run by one guy to have avoid wars. As long as you have nation states respecting each other's boundaries, you can also
Wait.
have peace.
I have two very fundamental questions here. First of all, since you brought up the idea of borders in other countries, does the magic apply in other countries? For example, when the majority cheered for Hitler and the law said to do what he did the people on the receiving end of that violence deserve it because it was the law in the country by way of their political representatives and authority?
They
has
had
spoken?
support. They had support.
I've made this point that they did have support, but that doesn't mean they deserved it, right? Not everything government does is moral or agreeable to
well,
us.
No
okay,
shit.
Oh,
what-
really?
Well, Kyle, what makes it moral? What makes it moral then, in your view? What is a moral government action?
I mean, I think in order to determine the morality, you have to have some metric, right? Some barometer of what's moral and what's
Yeah.
immoral.
I'm asking you what yours is.
And we can't even say that there's consensus over killing, because there's a lot of killings that people agree are moral or deserved or something like that. So there's
He asked you what your definition is, not other people's.
Yeah.
my metric, I would say, I have to say, is influenced by somewhat of a Christian upbringing. You know, 10 Commandments, reading some Jesus words,
With
and
Jesus,
and
Ralph.
being raised by my parents and things like that. And I'm aware of those influences on my perception today of what's right and wrong, as far as like a compass. But
I mean, I think those are great ideas, like the golden rule. You know, I think that's a great thing to live by. You know,
mhm.
and then you look at the 10 Commandments, like thou shalt not like steal for one, right? Thou shalt not kill. You know, so I mean, those are things that the governments do like all fucking day, dude.
Yeah, and lots of people, I mean, engage in those kinds of behaviors. But And that has to be a bit of a contradiction for a lot of Christians.
Including you.
Yeah, well, I'm not. No, I'm not. I'm not practicing in religion, but I'm saying, how do I determine right from wrong?
Well, I'm saying if you look at something the government does, I mean, you don't just grant it. You don't grant it
Carte
the position
blanche.
of like moral just by the virtue of it being done by the government, right?
That's correct. A lot of people will try to say that because I'm always supporting the government against anarchists, but
Yeah,
I
Kyle,
certainly still have a, I
Kyle,
still have
question.
a.
What is your favorite flavor of boot polish?
I guess I just call it issue by issue as I see it and try to come up with the best answer
What
based
is
on the
that,
scenario.
watermelon?
Wait. There's a very fundamental important point here that literally every single statist does this weird schizo routine. So I want this to be very clear. Kyle, the actions of government, are they immoral when you, Kyle, say they are immoral? And they are moral when you, Kyle, say they are moral, not when anybody else says so.
No, I mean, I'm not the ultimate arbitrator of what's moral and what's immoral.
Who the hell is?
I have.
Who
Well, that's a
determines
good
morality
question.
for you?
I mean, it's not you and it's not me. And certain
You just said
behaviors.
it was you. You just
Yeah,
said it was you.
I mean, it is like it's not from my perspective. That's how I perceive the things that it's doing, but I don't think that there's any kind of like Ayn Rand would say, A is A, or set in stone, or right answer. I think a lot of this stuff is very subjective, and
But these questions aren't about what other people think or what the majority thinks. It's about your moral judgment. Is it your moral judgment at the end of the day that you use to decide whether a government action is moral or not?
Yeah, again, yes, it is.
Okay, good. That's the first step to sanity.
Yeah.
The second step is realizing that if you stick to the answer you just said, authority disappears.
You lost me.
I know. If it is your judgment that you use to decide whether you believe government action is moral or not, that is you saying that the commands of a legislature do not determine or alter morality. Sometimes they're in line with it, according to you. Sometimes they're not in line with it, according to you. That puts your moral judgment above everything and everyone else on earth. The one more step I want you to take is to realize that rules out authority. What every statist wants to do is decide for themselves what government should do and then bear no responsibility when it uses violence to do that. You want government to carry out your will and force your will on the world, and yet bear no responsibility for the fact that you advocated violent aggression.
Oh, I'm okay. Hey, Larken, I'm okay with violent aggression when I think it's warranted. I want to make that clear. A lot of people put themselves in this box where they say, well, violent aggression is never appropriate. And I think there are cases where violent aggression is appropriate.
Okay, that's a separate issue. I'm not even talking about whether you should have my judgment or yours. If you put your moral judgment above the dictates of government, in other words, you can say when government did that, it was bad. When it did that, it was good. That is you putting yourself above authority. By definition, if your judgment is above it, it's not authority anymore.
No. I'm not putting myself above it. It's just my opinion. I have my own opinion on what they're doing, and I don't always agree with what they do. Matter of fact, 90% of the times I don't agree with what they're doing.
But you trust them to do what's best for you, even
No.
when you disagree.
I don't trust them to do what's best for me. I think they're largely incompetent, largely corrupt. I mean, I'm
you
not
have an
happy.
you have an ideal government in your mind that you would like to see.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, how about
you don't oppose the idea.
How about this? Before you impose that government on the rest of us, why don't you work it out with your friends? Get the bugs worked out, okay? When it's super awesome and you're like, we're finally got that ideal government, then start imposing it on me and Larken, okay? And right, but until
we
then,
would be lucky because if I got my ideal government, you know, what taxes would be coming down.
well, you know what? I'll
Troops
be
would be
happy to.
coming home.
You know what? I'll be happy to be ruled by you at that time. But I think until then, we can agree that we should be left alone until you guys tell you at least get it worked out. I mean, it's only been a couple hundred years,
James,
right?
this
Like
is
we
this
don't
is the
baby
part
steps.
you don't understand, James. I have no say over what the current government is doing. I'm trying to change it for the better, but
I
they're
thought
not
you were
going to leave
advocating for it.
anarchists alone or anyone alone. You know,
And
Because
neither
we're
would
honest-
you. You just said so. Wait, let me break this down to literally like third grade level. If government says you must do A, and your moral conscience says I must do B, something different. Not what they say, but I think I should do B. They say I have to do A. Which one outranks the other to you? Your conscience or the
I have to make a decision. I have to weigh the consequences, and this is where consequentialism comes in. I have to say what are the possible outcomes of breaking this law or breaking this command versus what are the outcomes of obeying it? You know what I mean? And make a decision.
Setting aside the practical thing of whether you dare to disobey or not, whose moral judgment at the end of the day do you believe? Your own or a legislature's? If they say this is what must happen and you think, I think this is what should happen, actually, you might be too scared to disobey. You know, there's, you know, they might have too many guns. You might go along with it anyway. At the end of the day, in your own mind, which outranks the other, your moral conscience or the dictates of a ruling class?
Oh, for sure, I'm going to think I'm right. I mean,
Okay.
You know.
In that case where you think you're right, do you think you have a moral obligation to obey and do the wrong thing? You might be scared into it, but do you have a moral obligation to do what you think is wrong?
No, probably not.
Okay, I agree. Do you know what it's called when you don't think you have a moral obligation to obey somebody? It's called them not being authority anymore.
Boom.
No, not necessarily. I mean,
Yes,
there's
by definition necessary.
no, that's not the definition. You're bringing morals into something that's just about their position in society and their power.
Not only
I mean,
is that
they could
bullshit, but you already pointed out it's bullshit about Mao's quote. It isn't just about the violence; it's about the perceived legitimacy.
Yeah,
And
I can
authority
still
does not mean the ability to rule; it means the right to rule. It is a moral concept.
I can
A
still think that
carjacker is
they're
not
legitimate
seen as authority.
authorities. I can disagree with a cop and still respect that he's a cop and that he's in a job where he has some power and he can give me orders, you know.
And he has some tasty boot polish.
Like let's say, I mean, let's say I get arrested and the cop tells me to lay down on the ground and put my hands behind my back. You know, I can completely
Does he
disagree
say Simon
with him.
Says?
Completely disagree with
Twister.
him, not want to do what he says and think that he's in the moral wrong, that he has no basis for this.
Yeah,
but it
you're
doesn't
jumping
mean
back-
I'm challenging. It doesn't mean I challenge his authority as a cop.
Yes, it does. You're
No, it
jumping back to
doesn't.
the
No,
irrelevant
you're
thing.
completely wrong. You're
if
completely wrong.
If you're scared into complying, like a carjacker points a gun in your face and says, "Give me your keys," and you go, "I don't want to die, so here are my keys," you don't imagine him to be authority. That's not what it means. It doesn't mean the ability to control. If you do not imagine a moral obligation to obey, that is what it means to be an authority, is to have the right to rule, which means the obligation on your part to obey. If you stop feeling an obligation to obey, it literally means that in your mind, that thing stopped being authority.
No,
That's
I
what the
still
words
feel an
mean.
obligation to obey in that case. I just don't agree with him.
What? That is utterly
I would
different.
follow his orders even though I didn't want to.
So you have an obligation to do what you think is wrong. You have a moral obligation to do what you think is morally wrong.
Kyle, would you turn in runaway slaves?
No.
Wait,
Are you sure? Because it kind of sounds like you would.
No,
this
I'm
is a-
saying if a cop orders me to get down on the ground, I'm going to get down on the ground whether I want to or not.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
that's
okay,
also-
Kyle.
Says get
Kyle,
in the
what
box
if
car. You get in the box car.
Kyle? Question: what if the police officer's cock happened to be bit by a poisonous snake? Would you suck out the venom?
No, but I just feel like Larken throws the word moral around way too much, and he just muddies the hell out of every issue. It's so hard to figure out. He's like, all right, so he gives you a moral order and you have a moral obligation, but then morally
No, I
it's
mean,
a gray.
well,
It's
dude,
like,
think about it.
keep
Think
it
about it,
straight,
dude.
man.
They
I don't know.
just hate talking
That
about
is
morals.
straight.
What are you going to do?
Yeah,
You can't talk about morals and be a
Just
statist.
because
It's
I
just
disagree with a politician's actions doesn't mean that I no longer think that they have any power or authority.
You realize how schizo that is? Wait,
No,
let me
like,
ask this question
I don't
again.
agree with a lot of stuff Trump says, but I
Wait.
still think he's the president.
Let me
Yeah,
ask
so
you
are
again.
you recognizing just the reality of that? Yes, this person has a lot of guns backing them. That's
Yeah,
one thing.
he has
That's one
guns
thing,
but-
and
It's
public
different than
support.
authority.
I acknowledge
but-
that he's the president of the country.
You acknowledge it, but you also legitimize it, right? You also say
Yeah,
like
yeah.
this is something that is in principle, this is a good thing to have this person in authority, not this particular
You'd
person.
rather have that and those people doing what they're doing than nothing.
Yeah, yeah, I do. I think we're
Well, not
better
even
off
that.
with
I'm
the
just saying
current
in-
government than no government for sure.
You'd rather have Trump and the Pentagon and State Department and the DEA and the
Ben.
Park Service and all of that stuff.
Yeah, I think the alternative is just complete chaos. I don't think that people would be civil and would be nice to each
Have
other.
you looked
I
out the
think
window
that,
lately?
James, I think with the yeah, I know, and it shows you
Dude.
how crazy people are. And
Yeah,
Yeah,
yet,
but there's
statists
plenty
are
of
losing
government
it.
around.
Like, oh, but we need police to protect us. We need police to protect us. Where are the police? Oh, they're busy shooting people with like blunt rounds in the face.
But
Like,
look at the schizophrenia here. You just said you approved of me being caged, and then you tell me you don't think people would be nice enough without government. It is the existence of your belief in authority that literally just advocated my robbery and imprisonment. And you're telling me that government, the thing you believe in that did that to me, is the thing that makes us be civilized. You are not civilized. You are not a moral human being because you still believe in that. And you just cheered for my victimization, a real world example that actually fucking happened to me because of people like you who, instead of using your own goddamn moral code, believe in this god of evil psychopathic shits, and you think it's legitimate because they did a bunch of scribbles.
yeah, because
And now
in
you
my,
condone what happened to me, and you tell me that without that thing that did it to me, we wouldn't be civilized. Go fuck yourself.
yeah, I think Larkin, that you are actually immoral because you are the one that says, I'm going to live here. I'm going to drive on these roads. I'm going to enjoy all the benefits of living in this country, but I don't have
Go
to pay anything.
Fuck yourself.
No, you owe money. You owe money to live
No,
here.
I
It's not
don't.
free to live in this country, Larkin.
I'm
I
going
don't
to
know
change the
whoever-
subject.
James, let me finish. I don't know whoever
No.
told you it was free, but it's not free. You know, and you got to pay. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is.
Law's the law. You got to
It's
pay,
not
you
free to live
anarchist.
here.
Larkin, I want to ask you about your article. I think it started as an article, but I see it's posted as a video called "When Should You Shoot a Cop?" Okay.
Yeah.
And this is a super provocative title, and it's been a while since I read it. But if I recall, like the first paragraph was like, most people aren't going to read it, and like this is why they're not going to read it. And it was like more of the, like talking about the fact how people are going to be completely freaked out by the title and not even read this article. So, but I think it does bring up a good question. When should you shoot a cop? And maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. And, maybe we could get people's opinion about, when should you shoot a cop? I'd like to hear from everybody on our panel, sort of on that question.
The thing is, and the article, which then was made into a video, and by the way, Glenn Beck, somebody printed it out and it was at some event, and Glenn Beck talked about it and made sure to not mention my actual name so people could look it up. But the whole point is the logical conclusion of what we were just talking about. If at some point you have the right to follow your own conscience above the dictates of the commands of an authority, whether it's like, slavery days in this country or in Nazi Germany or Mao's China or here with some evil law going on, if at some point first of all, if at no point you have the right to disobey, you're all the way a slave. You might as well just be a robot and stop existing. But if at some point you have the right to say, I'm not going along with this. This law is wrong. The authority is wrong. It's illegitimate. And I'm going to disobey. At some point, you also have the right to resist. And because they enforce all their laws by violence, that means you either go along with being victimized or you respond violently. Now you might be able to run away and stuff, but the article and then the video didn't even answer the question. Like, I can give my lines and where I would draw them, but it just asked the question to ask people, how much would you put up with before you would actually believe, no, now it's time, in this case, whatever it is, wherever the person draws their line, then I would actually actively resist and disobey.
But it forces people to at least draw a line somewhere.
Yeah. And most people have never thought about that because they've so focused on, being so indoctrinated into revering the politician scribbles called law and imagining that they actually mean something, that they never even think about that side of it of, when would I actually be justified in resisting? And it even points out you might not dare to, like if you're outgunned.
Or what if you saw a cop murdering somebody by putting their knee on their throat for 10 minutes while he gasped his final breaths?
Yeah.
Would that be a good time to shoot a cop?
Yeah. And the thing is, most statists, because it's an indoctrinated religious belief, they're incapable of calmly even having the discussion. Even it's basically saying, when should you shoot your God? And that makes them,
harsh,
existentially uncomfortable because you should. And a lot of people commented, you should never shoot a cop. And I said, did you actually watch the video? No, but I don't need to because of that.
Okay, so Larken, when you say most statists, is what you really mean most dudes named Kyle?
Well, he's not alone. He's not anywhere near being alone.
Well, Larken, listen, you told Kyle to fuck off. We all do that eventually. Okay. So we're all friends here nonetheless. So I appreciate you adding to the chorus, Larken. And it's tough love here on Punk Rock Libertarian Podcast. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not salty. I've heard way worse.
He's been around the block. We always make fun of him.
He's a veteran.
Being a filthy statist. So.
Yeah, but we love him though. We keep him around, dude. He's fucking awesome.
But
hey, okay.
Association.
Okay, so I mean, like, okay, so you've got this, like, if you don't have Kyle Wagner around or people bearing opinions, you get this like circle jerk of philosophy that gets really fucking boring.
Yeah. No, I would definitely be in a discussion with him. I just wouldn't want him anywhere near me.
Kyle is basically the cautionary tale of our show, where like, this is what statism could do to you, like not even once,
Okay. So, yeah, there's a big difference between who I will talk to, which includes all sorts of people from self-described Maoists to Nazis to everything else, and people I would actually want in my real life, and people who cheer for me being robbed into poverty and put in a cage. I don't want them in my life because they're literally immoral.
Okay, so Larken, we're running over. Is there anything you want to plug before we end the podcast?
Let's see. I do want to mention, because somebody mentioned the Jones Plantation, we're going to try to make that into a full-length movie, which I think would be really freaking powerful, like live action, real movie on a plantation and stuff. And we're still working on the pitch for that. I hope that happens. In the meantime, I'm working on so many freaking things. I don't know what to point to. We do have the Rose Channel, therosechannel.com, where right now a bunch of our different videos and the Candles in the Dark seminar is there. Several hundred old audio podcasts I did are there. The new audiobook of The Most Dangerous Superstition is there. So there's a whole bunch of stuff there. Otherwise, I would just sort of throw people at my YouTube channel because there's a million things going on there all the time, and all the old
yeah, dude, there's so much, man, and there's like so much more I like want to talk to you about. Now, like, if you're available, like, we do an after hours program. If you want to hang out for a little bit and talk on there,
I can do that. Yeah,
cool, awesome, man.
So
yeah, if you guys want to hit us up over at patreon.com, and you can participate. You can check out our after hours program. We also have t-shirts over at libertariancountry.com. If you type in the code PRL, you'll receive a 10% discount. If you spend $50 or more and you use the code PRL2, you'll receive a 20% discount. This podcast is brought to you in part by Conversations About Freedom podcast, hosted by Moral Bob. Until next time, live